Alli, do you think that where alcohol is concerned, it's a one size fits all, an all or nothing sort of thing? Do you know how it affects our health and aging?
Those are questions that I definitely have, and we got some answers today. We have Dr. Gregory Charlop on the show, who is a UCLA and Stanford-trained double board certified physician, and he's a leading expert in longevity and performance. He's going to talk to us about what the research says, what we know about alcohol, how much we should or shouldn't have, and how it affects health and aging.
And I was really pleasantly surprised with some of the answers. It was very enlightening. I'm so excited for you to listen to this episode. But before we dive in, let's give a shout out to Kathy Jo McBride. Thanks for listening. Now let's dive in.
Welcome to the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast, where we dive deep into pressing health and fitness issues facing aging women. I'm Alli Kerr.
And I'm Shawna Kaminski. And together we'll bring candid conversations, expert advice, and personal stories that will inspire and empower you on your own wellness journey.
Today is a hot topic, and we're super excited to have Dr. Greg Charlop with us to talk about alcohol and aging. This is such a hot topic. Welcome, Dr. Greg, to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me here. It's great to be here.
This one is one that we get so many questions about. I'm sure you do as well. And it has just become a hot topic about drinking, not drinking, alcohol and aging. There's just so many ways that alcohol is now in the conversation. Let's start with, why do you think that is? Why has it become such a hot topic?
Well, there's a couple reasons. I think, for one, people always like talking about alcohol. So I feel like to some degree, it's always been sort of a hot topic. But I do think two things have pushed it in the news more recently. One is there's some interesting data now that younger generations are drinking less than their predecessors. So if you look at Gen Zs and millennials, but especially Gen Zs, they have a lower rate of drinking than their previous generations, like Gen X and the baby boomers, things like that. So I think part of it is it's interesting to see this trend away from alcohol, especially for younger people. And I think the other reason is that there has been a lot of news stories about alcohol and the dangers of alcohol. The Surgeon General from the previous administration had a big thing about alcohol causing cancer. And so I think as a result, it's been in the news a lot because we're starting to take a look at the health dangers of alcohol and to really sort of assess how dangerous is it.
From a scientific perspective, what do we actually know about how alcohol affects our overall health?
Well, so the first thing I want to say, and I know this will come up again, but I just want to put it out there that I think that one thing we could clearly say from the data is that alcohol is not a health food. So anyone listening to this who's drinking alcohol because they think there's a health benefit to it, there is no overall health benefit to it. Now, I'm not going to say you shouldn't drink alcohol. In fact, I don't have that position at all, and I'm not telling you not to drink alcohol. But I do want to make it clear that as of the best science we have now, there's no health benefit to alcohol. And we could talk more about why people used to think that if you like, because there was some evidence at one time there was a health benefit. I'd be happy to talk more about it. But it isn't something that is a health food. It's not the same as fiber or spinach or something like that. In terms of how it affects us, it really remarkably affects a lot of the body. And a lot of that, to some degree, depends on quantity. It depends on the person and what other medical conditions you have. It depends to some degree on your age. It even depends on whether you're male or female. But it does affect the whole body, particularly the brain, the liver, and it has very systemic effects.
Now, one of the things that was interesting, and I heard you talk about this subject at a conference, that's how I met you, and you talked about studying alcohol and the challenges of doing alcohol studies. And I think that would be so fascinating because I think as lay people, we're like, well, we should just have this stuff figured out. And why don't we know exactly this, that, and the other? Can you speak about the process of studying alcohol and the effects on humans and the challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question. So with alcohol and with nutrition in general, actually, what I'm going to say sort of to some degree applies to all nutrition studies. It's very difficult to do human studies on this stuff that are good. And the best study, if you were designing a perfect study, so you really wanted to know, is alcohol good for you or not? What you would do is you would have two groups of people that are identical, same ages, same races, same male female breakdown, same medical conditions. And what you would do is you would randomize. One group would have to have a certain amount of alcohol. Ideally, you'd have a couple groups, with different amounts. Maybe one group would have one a day, one would have three a day. And you would have a control group with no alcohol at all. And then what you would do is you would blind it so the people wouldn't know if they were drinking alcohol. And the studiers, the scientists, wouldn't know which group had the alcohol. And then you would follow these two groups out for years. And then you would look and you would see, is there a difference in diseases or death between the two groups? And so let's say you've got two identical groups. One has to drink 2 drinks a day. The other cannot have any alcohol at all. You follow them out for 10 years, and then you could say, well, the group that has alcohol, they have higher rates of cancer, they've got higher rates of this, they have higher rates of that, they died earlier. Then you could say that alcohol almost certainly caused those things, because the only difference between these two groups is whether or not they had alcohol. And we could say there's a causal relationship. This is an important word for research. You'd say there's a causal relationship. The alcohol caused these problems. Now, the problem, of course, if you listen to that study the way I described it, it's absurd. Like, you would never actually be able to do that. You could never first of all, it wouldn't be ethical, I don't think, to randomize some people to having alcohol and some people not. You would never be able to force some people to have alcohol every day and prevent other groups of people from not having it at all. You would never be able to blind it. In other words, the people that are having the alcohol would clearly know that they've had alcohol, so you couldn't make it a mystery. And you wouldn't be able to fund it, because it would take a huge amount of money to fund the study I just described. So for many reasons, the study I just described could never happen. Now, we do studies like that for pharmaceuticals. And again, I don't want you to walk away with the impression I'm saying we should use pills for everything, but I just want to say from a research standpoint, it's much easier to study pills, pharmaceuticals, than it is to study alcohol or nutrition. If you were coming out with a new high blood pressure pill, for example, and you wanted to know, does this pill lower blood pressure and reduce, say, heart attacks? Let's say that's what you were testing for. It'd be easy to do the study I told you. You could easily randomize 2 different groups. One is a pill, one is a placebo. Nobody knows who has what. You follow them for a couple of years. And then you see if there's a difference in outcomes. That's easy to do. And the pharmaceutical companies will pay for it, because if you have a good pill, they can make a lot of money. So it's easy to test pharmaceuticals, difficult to test alcohol or nutrition. And so as a result, we can't conclusively say really off of any studies whether any nutritional thing or an alcohol thing causally produces a result. All we could do is we could look in humans. All we could do is we could look and say, well, the people that drink alcohol have higher rates of this or lower rates of that. But then you run into the trouble, did the alcohol cause it? Is it coincidental? Is it because of other lifestyle factors? Maybe people that drink a lot of alcohol, maybe they smoke, or maybe they don't exercise that much, or maybe they eat less broccoli, or there's some other thing. And so if you see a group of people who have a lot of alcohol and they have worse health outcomes, it may be the alcohol, but the alcohol could be just a marker for something else.
And then there's the issue of reporting, because my understanding is that most people underreport alcohol consumed. So you just have this mishmash of misinformation and potential causations that may not even be connected.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And that's exactly right. So as I mentioned earlier, nutrition studies in general are terrible. It's funny, I think my most responded LinkedIn post ever was I said nutrition research is garbage. It generated a lot of responses, both sort of plus and minus. But, one of the problems is really just that, in addition to what I mentioned, that you can't randomize it, you can't hide what people are doing, you can't fund it. You can't force people into having alcohol or force people into eating broccoli and prevent people from eating broccoli. The other problem is what we do is we do these studies that often rely on recall. So what you would do is you would say you were doing a study on alcohol. What you might do is you might ask people, well, how much alcohol do you drink, or how much alcohol did you drink a week ago, or whatever, and you're relying on their memory. And as you just said, people's memory are faulty. I mean, if you ask me what I had for breakfast 3 days ago, I couldn't tell you. I don't even know if I had breakfast 3 days. You don't remember these things too well. And so you're relying on memory. There could be bias. And then some people may be bashful. I think, like you're kind of hinting at there. I'm an anesthesiologist in addition to a wellness expert. And so I take care of people going into surgery, and I'll ask them, this comes up a lot, how much do you smoke? Oh, I smoke a little. And I always ask, well, what's a little? Because you're a little, is it 1 cigarette a day? Is it 2 packs? Everybody's little is different, So people are embarrassed about saying these things sometimes. So it's very difficult to do these kinds of nutrition studies.
Yeah, I know Shawna and I both have worked with clients and working to get food logs from them. So we know and I'll have clients that just clearly admit that they're never honest on their food log. They might be 80%. And then some of them just won't admit one way or the other. I mean, and then some of them will only track the days that they feel like they've done well, or the meals that they feel like they've done well on. So yeah, getting us to be transparent about what we're intaking into our bodies is a challenge.
There's also a Hawthorne effect, which is that you act differently if you know you're being watched.
Absolutely.
So say I came to you as a client and you're like, hey, I want you to do your food log for the next week, and then we'll talk about it. I may, even if I'm honest, I may eat healthier. I may throw in some more salads, cut out the Cheetos, stuff like that, because I know you're going to look at it. And Absolutely. So even if I'm honest, even if I remember correctly, what you're looking at may not reflect what I normally do. I may want to look good, for you for this food log, and give you something that isn't kind of my norm.
Sure. Yeah. Which is why they're effective, is when people start doing them, they do clean up their eating.
That's true.
Then while we're on food logs, let's go into weight management, because that is one of the questions that, well, maybe people don't have, but maybe we should have, is how does alcohol affect our weight, metabolism, fat storage? What do we know about that piece of it?
So alcohol, for many people, increases weight, and it does that through several mechanisms. One of them is that the alcohol itself has calories. So even if you could somehow drink pure alcohol mixed with water, which would be the lowest calorie way of having it, the alcohol itself still has calories. So by having it, you're ingesting essentially empty calories purely from the alcohol. Secondly, the alcohol usually is accompanied by something. So a lot of people, you have your margarita, or you have a beer, or something like that. So beyond whatever calories in the alcohol, you're also having the calories of the stuff that the alcohol came with, the calories in the beer, the calories in the margarita. We see a similar problem like this with coffee. I'm a big coffee fan. I've got my coffee here. Black coffee is great, but and it's healthy. But if you're having a Frappuccino, yes, there's coffee in it technically, but there's all kinds of sugar and other crap in there that you're eating. And so that's tagging along with the coffee. That happens a lot with alcohol. And then the third thing is, a lot of times, as you know, alcohol is a little disinhibiting. So, if you and I are hanging out and we're having some alcohol together, we're most likely going to have chips, or we're going to have some other snacks, or we're going to do other things. We're going to eat with it frequently, or maybe we're having it in the evening. We're at a bar, so we're at the bar now, so maybe we'll order some fries to go with our alcohol. So it may cause you to eat more food, and it might cause you to eat that food later in the day, depending on when you drink. And so for a number of reasons, people that drink alcohol in general tend to eat more calories.
We're going to interrupt this interview for just a second because we've got something we want to make sure that you know.
If you're struggling with your health, with your fitness, if you don't know where to start or you know what to do and you're not doing it, we're here for you.
And all you need to do to get our help is to reach out to Shawna and I at our email, sapodcast23@gmail.com. And we're happy to help and we will be in touch. Now back to the show. And those calories from the alcohol, I don't know if we realize how much those add up and how many calories are in alcohol. And, a couple drinks, and you're doing that 5 days a week, even 3 days a week over a year's time, that's a lot of extra calories. And we can be working out really hard because Shawna and I work in the fitness space and people are working out really hard, but then, throwing back a few drinks and not realizing how much that is derailing their goals for weight management, fat loss. So that's a big thing that we see.
Yeah, I mean, even and like, I don't want to pick on beer, but there are some of these kind of fancy type beers. You look at them, and they often don't even have their calories on the container. But some of them, and they're not all like this. So I'm picking an extreme example, but I was out for Chinese food the other day, and the person I was out with ordered one of these fancy beers. And for some reason, I was surprised it had the calories on the can, which a lot of times they don't. It had like 200 calories in the container. So you knock back 3 of those, you've just sucked down 600 calories right there, on top of your food.
So in addition to the extra calories, my understanding is that alcohol is, 7 calories per gram of alcohol. So there's that in addition to the mix and the less inhibited eating, the timing of the eating. So these are, ticks against weight maintenance or fat loss. But my understanding is also that it's metabolized differently than other foods of fats, carbs, proteins. Is that true?
So it is interesting. We often talk, a calorie is a calorie. We used to say that. And you look at like calories in versus calories out. But it is true that we handle calories differently. So some calories are processed slower, and some calories are processed in a less toxic way, if I could phrase it that way, than others. So sugar, carbohydrates, and alcohol tend to be processed quickly. You often get a quick spike in blood sugar levels, and they tend to be more toxic to the liver versus, say, calories from something with, say, a lot of fiber, for example, or calories from fat. So we do handle calories differently, and calories from sugar and calories from alcohol are probably more harmful in terms of how we metabolize them than, say, a similar number of calories from maybe a healthier fat, like olive oil, for example.
And let's talk a little bit about performance. We work with ladies that are working out, they're staying active, they're wanting to be healthy agers. And alcohol, how does that play into, if I have drinks on Sunday night and I'm supposed to get up early Monday morning for my workout, is there going to be any extra challenges for me there?
So alcohol definitely has an effect on athletic performance, and there's probably a few mechanisms for this. It appears that if you have alcohol around the time of, let's say, a good workout, and I don't think we even know why this is the case, but if you have a lot of alcohol around the time of a good workout, you seem to get less benefit from the workout. In other words, say you went to the gym and you had a really great session and you did all these things and you feel really proud of yourself. Instead of getting 10 units of benefit from that, maybe you get 8 units of benefit from that because you had some alcohol afterwards. So you're still getting something out of the gym, but you're maybe not getting as much as you would have. Alcohol affects your sleep. This is a very important thing, both for athletic performance and for its harmful effects. But alcohol affects sleep. And if you're having alcohol close to bedtime, it definitely impairs your sleep. This is one of the clearest, most uncontroversial effects of alcohol. And this happens even with relatively small amounts of it, if it's close to bedtime. And you could track it yourself. Like if you have an Oura Ring or something like that, you could see it yourself. Obviously, everyone's different, but for fun, this is one of those experiments you could do. Use your Oura Ring for a week, don't have any alcohol, then use it and have some alcohol, and you'll see for most people, even a modest amount of alcohol close to bedtime really impacts your sleep. And that has its own effects on performance the next day and on recovery. So what I recommend is, certainly if you're about to do something important tomorrow, you're running a big race, you're doing some sort of trial for an athletic team, something important, I would not have alcohol the day before. Secondly, if you really had that great workout that you're proud of, I would probably not have alcohol that day either, because you want to get the full benefit of the workout, in my opinion. If you are going to have alcohol, in terms of sleep, the best thing to do, if you can, is to have it be as far away from bedtime as possible. So, if you're watching these, like a Sunday afternoon baseball game or something, and you're having a couple beers at like 2, 3 o'clock, that's probably safe from a sleep standpoint. But if you're going to the bar, then going to bed, your sleep is going to be ruined.
And how is there like a half-life of alcohol, so to speak, that that would give a window of ideal time before ingestion and sleep where the effects are not felt?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is one of those things that there's a lot of individual variability. It really depends on your body composition. It depends on how you metabolize alcohol. We all metabolize it differently. Interestingly, that's also true with coffee. There are some people that metabolize caffeine very quickly, and other people that metabolize it slower. So there's a lot of genetic variation. And it also depends on age and the quantity of alcohol you drink. It depends on things like if you have it with food or not. So if you sit down, you have just plain alcohol with no food, you'll absorb it quicker people will know that if your kids are going off to college and they're going to drink, you'll often recommend actually that they have their alcohol with food. Even though maybe you don't want them eating French fries or pizza, you might recommend they have the alcohol with French fries or pizza, because at least that way they're not getting smashed right away. They're getting sort of a more gradual effect. They could pace themselves better. If you have alcohol on an empty stomach, as anyone who's done this knows, you feel the effect faster, and then it typically dissipates faster because you've absorbed it. So there are a lot of variabilities there, and this is why I think both for alcohol, but just in general, I'm just such a fan of like wearable type things or individualized testing, because what may work for you may not work for me. And this is one of those things, because there's so much variability, it's good to test yourself. And just again with caffeine, I hate to keep analogizing them, because I think coffee's healthy, whereas I think alcohol isn't. But caffeine clearly affects sleep as well, and we metabolize it differently. So you may be able to have coffee till 4 p.m. and have perfectly fine sleep, whereas if I have a drop after noon, my sleep is wrecked. And again, like, we would only know that by testing it, by using, say, a wearable device.
And what about have ladies that tell me, their life is stressful and they need that like evening toddy that's going to calm them and help them sleep. So what's going on in their head versus the reality of that?
It's funny. Someone told me the quote. I think I may have mentioned it at the conference, but the one time you don't want to have alcohol is when you need to have some alcohol. And we haven't really gotten into this, but I'm not as anti-alcohol as it may sound from the way our discussion goes, because I think that there's a lot of nice social benefits to it. If we're all going out to dinner and we want to have some wine, or we're watching a football game, we want to have some beer, or you're catching up with friends you haven't seen in a while, or maybe a husband and wife wants to have a nice glass of wine when they're on a date night. Like, in my opinion, for most people, that's perfectly fine. But the thing is, if you're using it for sleep, It is true that if you have alcohol, you may fall asleep faster. I'm not disputing that you probably will. You may have even run into people that like fall asleep at the bar or the club, because they had too much alcohol. So it's not that the alcohol prevents you from falling asleep. The problem with the alcohol is it prevents you from having the deeper, high quality sleep, and it causes your sleep to be more fragmented. So if you ran into someone, they're like, oh yeah, I need alcohol to fall asleep. But that may be true in the sense that they may fall asleep faster with the alcohol, but their quality of sleep is much worse than it would have been without it.
And we deal with ladies that are in that perimenopause, menopause age range. And so a lot of our listeners are there or maybe past that stage. But that may be, I wonder, and I don't know if you've seen anything as far as how that changes as far as how much people drink during different stages of life, especially, I don't know if there's any research on like women and menopausal or when your kids are at a certain age, like, are there any things that you are aware of that look at that, like women are struggling to sleep during those perimenopausal, menopausal years. So I don't know if this is a tool that people pick up more during that time, or do you see anything that lends you to see any trends there?
Well, so there is, the whole concept of self-medication. And you'll see this a lot. There's a lot of people maybe who are stressed a lot, or perhaps people with certain psychiatric conditions, or people that are in difficult life circumstances. And or as you said, even sometimes people perimenopause. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why someone might feel a need to self-medicate, but they then turn to things that are accessible that seem to make them feel better. It could be alcohol, it could be cigarettes. It's interesting, a lot of people say with schizophrenia, smoke. And to some degree, that's a bit of self-medication. They're kind of feeling better doing that. And, people do because it's easy to do that. You kind of feel better in the short term. It's common. So I get it. And I think that happens a lot. What I always try to tell people to do, in my mind, I look at it as something happens you're not happy with, and you're trying to figure out a way to cope with it. And in my mind, I know it's easy for me to say, this is going to sound kind of holier than thou, but there's positive coping mechanisms and negative coping mechanisms. So if someone has just had a bad breakup, or they just got fired from their job, or they're not feeling well because they're having bad perimenopausal symptoms, you want to do something about it. So you could either do what I would say is like a positive thing or a negative thing. So the negative things would be, like drinking a lot, smoking, using drugs, gambling, that kind of stuff, destructive behaviors. Or you could do the positive things, like go to the gym, be social with your friends, meditate, stuff like that. And so I think as healthcare providers, one of the things I think is very important for us to do is to try to steer people away from these negative coping mechanisms more towards the positive coping, because we all have to cope at times for things. You want to give people positive tools. If I have a bad day, it'd be much better if my instinct is, I'm really upset. I had a really bad day. I'm going to go work this out at the gym, rather than saying, I had a really bad day. I'm going to go down a bottle of wine.
Absolutely. And, that is obviously the ultimate goal, is to turn towards those positive things. And sometimes people are not more attracted, but they are, it's the carrot or the stick. And sometimes maybe that's why we're getting some of the messaging that alcohol doesn't have the health benefits that it once was thought that there was these benefits. Maybe people are drinking less because of that.
Yeah, and I'm happy you mentioned that, because I did want to touch on this, which is why did we think alcohol was healthy in the first place? And there's two reasons. One was people discovered resveratrol, which is a chemical in alcohol, red wine in particular. I mean, not in alcohol itself, but it's in red wine. And some people like David Sinclair, sort of big advocates of this, and they say, well, it's resveratrol is good for you, it's anti-aging, it reduces the risk of cancer and diabetes. You've got the French paradox, where you've got all these people in France that have these sort of crummy-seeming diets with a lot of fat, yet like they're not overweight and they're doing pretty well. Is it the red wine? So part of it was that. And then part of it was this thing called the J curve. And so what we found, what many studies found, and this was seen across multiple studies, is what you could do is you could look at the rate of mortality or the rate of serious problems for people relative to how much alcohol they consume. And what they found is that people that had, I'm going to make up these numbers just so this is illustrative. Let's say people that don't have any alcohol at all have a mortality, again, I'm making this up, have a mortality rate of, say, 5% in 10 years. People that have one drink a day have a mortality rate of, say, 4% in 10 years. People that have 2 drinks a day have a mortality rate of 6%. People that have 3 drinks have a mortality rate of 10%. People that have 5 or more drinks have a mortality rate of 20%. So people would look at that and they'd say, well, a little bit of alcohol is good for you because the people that have a little bit of alcohol had a lower mortality rate than the people that had none at all. But then clearly everybody would agree people that have a lot of alcohol have all kinds of problems. That was never in dispute. No one argued that. Anyone who's having 3, 4, 5 drinks a day consistently, they are definitely harming themselves, and that was never in dispute. But the question is 1 or 2 drinks better than none? And a lot of people thought that maybe it was because of this J curve. But we now think that the reason the J curve looked that way is, again, like we said at the beginning of this program, you can't randomize people into having alcohol or not, which is the way you would test it. So all you could do is go by what people are doing. So the question is, why are the people that are not having any alcohol at all not having any alcohol? And yes, it's true, some of them may not do it for religious reasons or personal conviction or something. But a lot of the people that weren't having any alcohol at all were not having any alcohol because they had serious medical problems. They had liver failure, they had cancer, they had all these other things. And so as a result, they were avoiding alcohol because they couldn't have it. So the population that was having no alcohol was a sicker population than, say, the average person who has a glass of wine here or there. And so what that did is that skewed the data, made it look like a little bit of alcohol is healthier. But what really did is it just showed us that the people who drink some alcohol are healthier people on average than the people that don't have any at all. So that sort of concept has been debunked. And so I think it's safe to say now that the current consensus, and who knows, this will change, things change all the time, but the current consensus is that no amount of alcohol is healthy. In other words, if you're going from 0 and you're adding an alcohol, you're only causing harm. However, and this is where I differ from a lot of people, a small amount of alcohol for most people causes, in my opinion, a nearly negligible amount of harm. I'm not saying it's healthy, but the amount of harm from having a drink here or there is virtually 0. Whereas if you're having 3, 4, 5, 6 drinks a day, there clearly is harm. So my position on this, and I think this is the most common sense thing, I'm all about common sense, is if you have a drink here or there because you like it, you enjoy it, or you enjoy the social aspect of it, or you like having a nice glass of wine with your salmon or something like that, I wouldn't feel guilty about that. We all do things that have a certain degree of risk. And we accept that risk because it adds value to our lives. We all eat foods from time to time, like ice cream. We all know ice cream is not good for you. Like I just don't think you can make a case that ice cream is good for you. Yet we eat ice cream from time to time. We do that even though we know it's not good for us, because we think, well, it adds more value for me to have an ice cream with my kid to celebrate their birthday than it would be if I'm standing in the corner with my arms folded saying, no, I'm not having any ice cream because it's bad for me. So my position is, for most people, if you have alcohol in moderation and responsibly, and you enjoy it, and you know that it's not making you healthier, live your life, like go and just like having ice cream at your kid's birthday party. Like, I mean, who am I to tell you not to do that? And so I think it's similar to that for most people.
And I really appreciate that position, because even some of the new guidelines that have come out are entirely restrictive, that many people will just dismiss them entirely.
I agree. And I think Andrew Huberman actually said this well, where he said, if you don't drink alcohol, don't start drinking because you think you're doing yourself a favor, because you're not. But if you do drink alcohol and you do it in moderation, and you're not part of a select group of people that you really shouldn't have any, do it and just know there's a small amount of risk to it. And you are right that when we have these sort of extreme health statements, many people recoil against them and don't do it at all. And you see this a lot, you see this a lot with like weight loss and nutrition. You see it with exercise. You see it all the time. Someone's on some sort of extreme diet and they have a lapse, like that there are these beautiful chocolate chip cookies in the break room at work, and you have a few cookies, it's knocked you off your diet. You don't want people saying, like, forget the diet, because I've had these chocolate chip cookies. You want people to say, all right, well, I had these chocolate chip cookies today, but, I'm going back on the diet. It's not going to derail me. It just, these happen from time to time. But when you have these extreme things, then people have those chocolate chip cookies, and then the next thing you know, they've just thrown in the towel on the diet altogether because they think they can't do it.
I mentioned to a client that would be speaking to you, and she brought up a good point that I wanted to ask you about, and that was that the liver is affected by alcohol and can be regenerative. But if one were to completely shift from drinking alcohol on the regular to no alcohol, at what point would the liver feel no effect? Like, would completely recover, so to speak, from maybe not extreme alcohol intake, but regular alcohol intake?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's actually remarkable that for many things, the body, as long as you haven't gone overboard, the body can heal itself pretty well. Even smoking, in fact, there are some interesting tables. If you look at a smoker, smoking, of course, has tons of harmful effects, but there's tables in this. I forget where to find them, but I've read them. And what they do is they show over time, like your risk of, like, if you stop, say you're a smoker and you stop smoking today, within like a day or two, your oxygen level goes back to normal. Say within a year, maybe your risk of a heart attack goes back to normal. Within 3 years, your risk of lung cancer goes back to normal. Like, there's interesting, your body can heal itself pretty well, even from pretty bad stuff. The liver heals itself pretty well too. The liver regenerates quite well. And so, as long as you're not cirrhotic, meaning like your liver is like sort of essentially fibrous and close to failure, if that happens, that's very hard to recover from. And cirrhosis, for many people, is very difficult to recover from. So if you've had so much alcohol that you're at that point, obviously you should stop, but that's not an easy road of recovery. But if you have just had a couple glasses here or there, for most people, the liver damage is really quite small to begin with. If you're, say, a social drinker, but for most people, your liver would recover pretty quickly. And your liver is, for most people, is pretty well designed to handle small-ish amounts of alcohol. The problem with it is if you have a lot and then you get into this sort of fibrotic cirrhosis stage, then you may be to some degree past the point of no return. Cirrhosis is a very difficult thing to recover from.
And I love something that you said at the conference. We kind of talking about risk. You gave the example of like driving in a car or being on an airplane. We do these things knowing that there's a risk, but we do them. And that just kind of goes back to the, if you're going to have alcohol. And I also think just with our listeners, I think one thing that Shawna and I are working to get across as far as healthy aging is that there's also this bucket of like, if you're doing these things, like you are paying attention to your sleep, you are, eating well most of the time, you are getting some exercise. Like, can you speak to kind of how that can, like, if you are having a little alcohol, but you're also doing these things, is that better than having a little alcohol and not doing those things as far as taking care of yourself in other healthy ways?
Well, so yes, definitely. And so there's this concept in economics called marginal benefit, which is how much extra benefit do you get out of doing something, right? So if you're someone who drinks 5 drinks a day, which is a lot, and you cut that down from 5 drinks to 1 drink a day, you've gotten a huge marginal benefit. Like that change will do wonders for your longevity. It'll really reduce your risk of cancer. It'll reduce your risk of liver disease. It'll improve your performance. It'll improve your weight. It'll almost certainly reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease. There's a huge benefit from that. So if you have someone, you could talk them into going from 5 glasses a day of wine to 1 glass a day, you're really going to help them. With exercise, if you could talk someone into going from not exercising into exercising some, and you know this, where you get them even just to take a walk a few times a week, and that's it. There's huge benefit from that. There's big benefit from that. But you start losing benefit after a certain point, or the fight isn't worth the fight, maybe. You could put it that way for certain things. So like, if you could do certain things like exercise regularly, drink in moderation, wear seatbelts, don't smoke, eat a reasonably healthy diet. If you've done those things, you've done nearly everything, get enough sleep. You've done nearly everything you could do that's backed by science to live longer and have connections. Now, when you start trying to go from 1 glass of wine a day to a half a glass of wine a day, or if you're trying to increase, say, walking from 20 minutes a day to 25 minutes a day, is there a benefit? Yes. But that benefit is small compared to going from not walking at all to walking. And so my point is that, and I always teach this with my kids, you want to pick your battles to figure out what's worth fighting about. Like, to me, if I have a patient that's coming in and maybe they're drinking say a drink a day, but they're also not exercising, and they're not eating any vegetables, like, my effort is going to be much better put trying to get them to eat vegetables or to exercise rather than to try to get them to go from 1 or 2 drinks a day to 0 drinks a day.
I really love the pick your battle and not take one hill to die on, which is no alcohol under any circumstances, because I think that moderate approach in any health battle is the one that people are going to pick up on. So if there was a person, a listener, thinking about cutting back on alcohol, or like, what would be practical first steps if that was their hill to die on, or their battle that, hey, I want to, kind of reduce my alcohol, what would be your suggestions?
There's a few good ways to do it if you want to do it. One is that you can make rules for yourself. In other words, like, it turns out, if you keep yourself out of situations, it takes less willpower than being in the situation and dealing with it. So, for example, if you know that when you go with your friends to the bar to watch a football game, you're going to be tempted to drink because you're at a bar and all your friends are drinking. Yes, you could go to the bar and just have sparkling water, but that takes a lot of willpower. So for many people, then the easiest thing would be just don't put yourself in that situation when you're at the bar, watching football. I hate to say it, I like watching football. But if you know that that's an environment where you're likely to drink, just don't put yourself in that environment. The same is true with people. We all know some people, I hate to say it, but they're kind of bad influences, or maybe bad influences in certain ways, and you see this a lot, like the Alcoholics Anonymous talks about this too, is if you're trying to not drink, but all of your friends drink, it's difficult because anytime, even if you just go out to eat with them or whatever, like they're gonna order some alcohol, and you have to, again, each time say no, and that takes a lot of willpower. So what you want to do, and it turns out for most people it's easier, I hate to say it, but to switch away from friends that push you to do a habit you don't want, and switch toward friends that push you in the right direction. So I think those are two things. And then if you're, the same concept, but the willpower is keeping things out of your house. So if your goal is to eat less cookies because you're trying to lose weight, if you could avoid buying cookies and bringing them into your house, you've kind of done 80% of the battle, right? Because it's much easier for you not to eat cookies if you don't have them around you, rather than if they're in the pantry staring at you in the face and you have to say, no, 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 I'm not going to eat you today. So keeping it away is one of the best things. So I think those are, in my mind, those are some of the biggest bang for the buck things. Obviously, joining support groups can be useful for people. So Alcoholics Anonymous, other things like that are, I think, quite effective if you're committed to it. And those are probably some of the best. If your goal isn't so much to quit it, but just to kind of reduce your consumption, then I think that's another thing where rules can come into play. And what I mean by that is, let me give you an example. I think I'm all about trying to figure out ways of using the least amount of willpower so you're not like struggling with this each time. So let's say your goal is that you want to eat less red meat. All right. What you could do is you could just make a rule and say, I'm just not eating any more hamburgers. It's a rule. You don't have to think about it. You made this rule. You're committed to it. Now, will you still eat a steak? Yeah, okay. You know, if you're at a steak restaurant, yes. Will you still eat a hot dog? Well, yeah, if you're at the baseball game, you'll eat a hot dog. But if you've made a rule, you're not going to eat any more hamburgers. The nature of that rule is you're going to end up eating less red meat in total for most people, and you're not going to have to think about it. If you and I go out, you know, to a burger place, I'm not going to order the hamburger because I have a rule. I don't eat it. It's kind of like I'm pescatarian. So I've made a rule. I don't eat, I don't eat red meat. I don't eat chicken. I don't eat turkey. If you and I go out to dinner, I'm not going to wrestle with, should I have turkey today? Because I've already made a rule for myself. I don't eat turkey. I'll find something else that fits within my framework. So I think those are some of the easy things to do. And if your goal is to reduce your drinking, you can make rules like, well, I'm only going to drink Thursday and Friday, or I'm only going to drink before 7 p.m. And so you're not prohibiting yourself from doing it, but you're restricting it in a way that doesn't require as much willpower.
And I love that. I want to switch gears because I know that some of our ladies are going to want me to ask this. And this may be a motivation for some, for us to at least maybe think about kind of where we are on that spectrum of how much are we doing, and is it too much? Is it, are we at a good level? And that is about aging, because our whole podcast is about healthy aging. And can you speak to how alcohol affects, whether it's visually aging, internally aging, our mind, like just the effects on aging?
Well, so alcohol definitely. So again, I want to distinguish a very small amount of alcohol, which I think is reasonable to have for most people, like a drink here or there, versus regular moderate to heavy drinking. So among people that drink more, their risk of the diseases of aging are higher. So they're more likely to get cancer. They're more likely to get neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease. They're more likely to battle weight issues. And they're more likely to have some of the main dangers of aging, which like things like falling, for example. So if you look at older people, and people, I think this isn't really talked about enough, but everybody thinks, well, you get older, you don't want to get heart disease, you don't want to get cancer, you don't want to get Alzheimer's disease. We all think about that, but we don't really think about things like we don't want to fall and break our hips. That isn't something that's talked about a lot, but that's actually one of the big consequences of aging. And actually, not only is it a big cause of death for older people, but it's a big cause of major disability. In other words, if you have an 80-year-old woman who is reasonably healthy, she's living by herself, she does her grocery shopping, she does everything, she's fine, but she falls and she breaks her hip, even if she survives, and she may not, but even if she survives, and even if she survives the surgery, and even if she survives the recovery after the surgery, she will never be the same. She will never be the same. Her leg will not be the same, her strength will not be the same, and she will be debilitated for the rest of her life. So things that she used to be able to do before her broken hip, she will not be able to do after it. And she may go from being an independent woman to now needing care just because of this hip. And that's in the best case scenario, that she survives and she recovered and she had a good surgery and everything. And alcohol affects balance and the likelihood of falling. So for many age-related diseases, alcohol will increase the risk of them. And so that's why, if you're looking at healthy aging, there's different ways of defining what aging is. But for a lot of people, you look at aging in terms of like accumulating these age-related diseases. Alcohol will cause, especially, drinking more, will cause you to accumulate more of these age-related diseases.
I wanted to, that's a great explanation. I also wanted to back up to the question about reducing drinking, and if or when anyone would feel benefits, and if so, what those benefits would be. Because if people are considering reducing alcohol consumption, they really want to see a return on that effort. So what return would they redeem from that effort, do you suppose, and in what time frame?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so there's something called 75 hard. I don't know if you've heard of it. I haven't done it. It sounds like too much for me, but but I know people that have. And as part of 75 hard, they have to not drink. They have to abstain from drinking. I think it's for 75 days. I think that's where it comes from. And the people that I've spoken to that have done this, and these are elite performing people, do feel a difference. They do feel better. They sleep better. They have more energy during the day. Their mood is better, and their performance at their occupation is better. Now, obviously, that's not all from the alcohol, because they also, like, there's other things that come along with it. Like, I think you have to exercise more and stuff like
There's
that.
a lot of exercise involved in eating. Yeah,
a lot of other things. So I know it's not only the alcohol, but I'm sure the alcohol plays a role there. And so I think for elite performers, those elite performers will perform better. And by elite performers, we're talking like elite athletes, maybe say an elite surgeon, or someone who has a very demanding job that requires a lot of mental effort, a lot of mental attention, air traffic controllers, pilots, things like that require like very demanding mental energy. Those people will perform better if they go from some alcohol to no alcohol. And I think a lot of that is because of the sleep effects of it, as opposed to the alcohol itself. So I think, this comes up a lot. I'm a big believer, as I say, in like common sense stuff and individualized stuff. So, this goes back to the hill to die on question. I think if someone comes to you and they're like, well, I'm thinking about quitting alcohol because I'm hoping it'll help me be better at this. There's what I would do is I would set up an experiment with them, like have them create logs of how they feel and how they're doing and stuff like that as they currently are, and then do a test where they don't have alcohol for a month and see if there's a difference. Do they wake up feeling more refreshed? There's good tools for this. Do they wake up feeling more refreshed? Have them wear a wearable. Are they sleeping better at night? And they could see whether there's a difference or not. And I think that this technique can be used for a lot of different interventions, is just give it a go and see, for a month and see whether it makes a difference or not. Now, that's obviously the short-term stuff, like the performance benefits. The longer-term stuff, like say your goal is to avoid cancer, obviously you can't test that by stopping alcohol for a month because you won't know, right? I mean, if someone gets cancer, they may not get it for 10, 15, 20 years, and even then you don't know what caused it. So obviously, if the concern is, I don't want to get cancer, I don't want to get heart disease, I don't want to get Alzheimer's, you can't test it. But if the concern is, I want to be more productive at work, I want to get up earlier, I want to have better workouts at the gym, I would just use a wearable and I would test it for a month with abstention.
And it makes sense that you can't put specifics on, hey, within 30 days, you're going to feel XYZ, because the effects of alcohol are so individual. And then it's not just the alcohol, but what else are you doing? What's your diet like? What's your sleep or stress like? So there's just so many factors. So I love your position on do an individual test and then create ways that you will create awareness, whether it's journaling, whether it's using the wearable and using that data to manage how did it work for you.
And the one thing I just want to touch on, because we haven't really talked about this too much, and I think it's important as if a plus of alcohol, if I could use that term, is for many people it has social benefits. So a lot of people, you and I might meet up after work to get a drink together. We're not getting smashed at the bar. We're just going, there's the new place that just opened up down the block, and we're like, let's just go, we'll have a drink, we'll chat for an hour after work. Or like I said, maybe a couple, they're having a glass of wine with dinner. There are moderate, responsible alcohol can have some social benefits for people. And I don't think that we should just ignore those. I think there is real tangible benefit to that for many people. And so if the alcohol, having a drink, like I said, gives us an excuse for you and me to go out to the cool new place that opened up across town after work, I would say that glass of wine has done us a favor. It's given us a social outing. We could chat about other things. We're having a nice time. We're being responsible about it. Like, I think there's a real plus to that. Now, do you need the alcohol for that? I mean, no. You and I could go, we get a seltzer together too. But I think, culturally, that just doesn't happen as much, right? So if you could use it responsibly, I think alcohol has some social benefits. Now, obviously, if you and I are going to go and we're going to get drunk at the bar, that's different. I would say that in that case, the harm of the alcohol has outweighed whatever social benefits we're getting. But if we're going and we're just having a drink together and we're chatting about our days, I think that has a plus, and I think that shouldn't be ignored.
Love it. Yes. I think that, it's all about weighing the kind of what is the net, is it a net positive for you and how it serves you in that instance, or is it a net negative? And it can be both. And we just figuring out that is really it sounds like is really the question.
Right, and that's why so many things need to be individualized. And you see this with fitness. If an NFL player walks in your door and wants fitness advice, you're going to give them different advice that you would give to the 60-year-old couch potato. With the NFL player, you're going to be real precise, and you're going to do all these things. So like you're just trying to work really hard to get a tiny incremental improvement, because in that case, that tiny incremental improvement may make the difference between them being on the team and them getting cut. When the 60-year-old couch potato walks into your door, if you can get them to do practically anything, it's sort of a win, because you know that going from nothing to something is adding a tremendous amount of value in their lives. So we have to take these individualized approaches, reflecting someone's life circumstance, their biology, all these other things.
As I said before, I really like your common sense approach. Because I think a lot of people might listen, might not even tune into this episode because they might think, oh, he's going to tell me not to drink, and it's like, I really want to emphasize that, like, I just don't think it's a good idea to live in a world of extremes, never or always. There's always a sometimes in some cases. So if you had a wish for our listeners today, what would it be?
Well, my wish would be that from a health standpoint, you would focus on the big things where your intervention will pay off. So if you could go from not exercising to exercising, focus on that rather than cutting your drinking down from 1 glass a day to none. If you don't eat vegetables, focus on throwing in some vegetables into your diet rather than trying to squeeze 5 more minutes out at the gym. Like, go for the big bang for the buck stuff as opposed to eking out just small marginal returns on things you're already doing well.
Alli?
My wish would be that we look at ourselves as individuals and our individual goals and make sure that our decisions are in line with the goals and they just make common sense. If I'm wanting to lose weight and I'm drinking three glasses of wine, maybe that's something that might make a big difference for me. Maybe that's a lever to pull. But just figuring out for me what is going to serve me best based on my goals.
And as going last, I always agree with our guest and with you, Alli, is that we need to live in a world that is moderate and, like you said, Alli, what is going to serve us best? And if that means decreasing alcohol, maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's increasing vegetables and enjoying that glass of wine every week.
One thing I just feel like I obligated to jump in, because we didn't talk about this at all, and I just don't want to leave this discussion without at least quickly touching on this, is there are some people that should not drink alcohol at all. Mm-hmm. So obviously, if you're pregnant, you should not drink alcohol. If you're a child, you shouldn't drink alcohol, in my opinion. Many chronic diseases, particularly liver disease, you should not drink alcohol. People on certain medications shouldn't drink alcohol. People that have a personal history of either alcohol or other addictions, or a strong family history of alcohol or other addictions, should not, in my opinion, drink alcohol. And if you have questions, speak to your doctor about it. So I just want to leave people that while I think for many people having a small amount of alcohol is fine, there are some people that really should truly avoid it entirely.
Thanks for listening. You'll find me, Alli, on Instagram at Alli Kerr Fitness.
And you'll find me, Shawna, on Instagram at Shawna Kaminski. Feel free to pop us a DM with questions and or feedback. If you're enjoying the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast, please subscribe and share it with other health-minded women. Ratings and reviews are also much appreciated and help us get our message out to a larger audience.
Until next time, be healthy and be happy.